Towards the end of World War I, China and Russia experienced major revolutions. The Russian Revolution caused Russia to drop out of the war due to financial problems. After the war, Russia began to decline as a world power. The peasant dissatisfaction and the human and financial cost of the war led to the end of the Tsarist rule. In 1917, another revolution occurred, leading to the rise of communism in Russia. After World War I, China fell into a period of constantly changing governments. Mao Zedong in the Communist People's Republic of China was victorious in this struggle. After many failed attempts at industrializing China, Zedong was overthrown and a more extreme communist leader came into power. This leader forbade democratic ideals. This is much like how China is today. The U.S. has had a very capitalist society that's viewed differently among different nations of the world. Western nations love this type of society and view U.S. products as a staple in everyday life. In non-Western nations, there are mixed reactions toward this type of society. Some places absolutely love it, while others absolutely hate it. Women have gained increasingly more rights over the years. In the West, women can pretty much do anything men can do. In China, women are treated much like they are in the West. Ancient Chinese traditions such as foot binding have been made illegal. Women are allowed to participate in politics, and they're expected to work outside of the house. Immigration's always been a big part of our world, but during this time period, especially immigration was booming. In the Eastern Hemisphere, the World Wars caused Europe to lose a large percentage of their male population. This led to the lack of workers and encouraged many people from the Middle East and Asia to migrate to Europe. Korea had a huge population, so the government encouraged immigration. China, due to its high population, made laws limiting the number of children you could have. There were hundreds of thousands of people displaced to the Western world due to the wars, which caused mass migration. World War I had a large impact on economic development all across the world. During World War I, most European countries stopped exporting to Africa, so most countries already had weak economies and couldn't industrialize. They mainly relied on mineral trade and farming. Due to World War I, Europe stopped exporting to Latin America. Latin America had no other choice but to industrialize. In the Pacific Rim, China mainly exports illegal drugs. Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore are all huge in the electronic and textile industry, and Vietnam was the world's leading exporter of rice. In the West, European nations are large traders with each other. Europe and the U.S. are major exporters of heavy industry and resources. Russia has always struggled in terms of wealth. Before communism, they were struggling because of World War I and the numerous revolutions occurring there. After communism had taken over, Russia was still struggling due to the lack of inhabitable land to accommodate all the people, increased ethnic clashes, and large opposition to democracy and other Western ideas were causing problems. The Cold War put pressure on many nations to become communist. Asia felt tons of pressure from the USSR to become communist, and many nations do, in fact, convert to some sort of communism. South American nations had relatively weak governments, so they turned to communism as an attempt to save their country. The Middle East mainly opposes communism because of the support of the U.S. Because Eastern Europe was already heavily influenced by the USSR, most nations here turned to communism. World War I had many positive and negative impacts on the world. Europe and the Americas experienced a huge depression. Eastern Europe gained freedom from Russia, and Western Europe received huge pieces of land from the Ottoman Empire, while the USSR lost land on the other hand. In the Eastern Empire, the Ottoman Empire shrunk to the size of Turkey, and Japan increased its imperial expansion into Eastern Asia. Many colonies gained independence for their help in the war. World War II had a huge impact on the political aspect of the world. Germany was divided into 4 parts. USSR received large chunks of land. Eastern Europe joined the USSR. The United Nations was created. The USSR and the U.S. became the 2 superpowers. European world domination ended. China regained almost all its land, but was divided still between nationalists and communists. Korea was split in 2. One is under U.S. control, and one is under USSR control. African colonies began to ask for independence again. Totalitarianism are similar in that they both have dictators. They differ that fascism is extremely right-wing and totalitarianism is extremely left-winged. Nationalism in Western countries meant expansion and imperialism in countries outside of their own. Nationalism in colonies meant self-determination and the ability to be independent. Confucian philosophy was important during dynastic China, and there was a social hierarchy or a structure of classes. The Communist Party rejected the values that were traditionally known, and and were faced with oppositions the people presented. The class structure was gone, lands were redistributed, but women got more rights than they'd had before. High-tech warfare works well, but it takes time to plan it out and prepare, and it's very expensive. Guerrilla warfare is less efficient, but more flexible and inexpensive. High-tech warfare is typically used by powerful countries like the USA, while guerrilla warfare is usually used by third-world countries. The West is made up of democratic and capitalist nations led by the United States. The East is made up of communist and totalitarian nations, which was led by the Soviet Union. The West has done better overall than the East has. Globalization made things much easier for NGOs, short for non-governmental organizations. NGOs are nonprofit agencies that offer relief services and support during events such as natural disasters and wars. Some good examples of NGOs are the World Bank and the Red Cross. The decolonization of both Africa and India resulted in independence, but also caused conflicts over independence. In India, religious tension rose between the religious groups, the Hindus and the Muslims. Tribal wars were beginning in Africa during this time. The status of women in China and Iran rapidly changed after the revolutions. Before the revolutions, women's roles in both societies changed. After the revolutions, women got the privilege to be educated and acquired many more rights. As time went on, the Chinese continued to let women become more and more skilled, while Iran pulled back the opportunities. Other countries are quickly receiving cultural influence from the Western culture. Many countries like China and India let it really influence their societies. In other words, they love it. Muslim countries refuse the culture and view it as a threat, causing them to fight back through terrorism. On September 11, 2001, an act of violence was committed against the U.S. A terrorist group, Al-Qaeda, took control of our airplanes and crashed them. 2 were crashed into the Twin Towers. Another was crashed into the Pentagon, which is in Arlington, Virginia, close to D.C. The 4th crashed into the countryside of Pennsylvania and was on its way to D.C. 2,973 people were killed, and an additional 19 hijackers died because they committed these acts. Because we got attacked, we declared war in Afghanistan. Our ultimate goal was and is to get rid of the Taliban, who helped out Al-Qaeda, the horrible terrorist group. Ground Zero is in New York and is where the 2 Twin Towers stood.